what you accomplish is empty if God isn't honored in the process. In this story, Moses accomplishes something. The water comes out because of what he did. Now it's ultimately God, but that feels like an accomplishment, but it's a failure because he lost sight of this. The point was never just to get the people water. It was never just to get the people to be quiet and stop their complaints. The point has always been to honor God as holy, to trust him. We're in a series that we've been calling the Ministry of God's Promise. This morning, I wanted to be able to start off with sharing something that I found interesting, but before I share that, can someone bring me the clicker? Because I forgot it. So we all, growing up, we've had heroes. We have heroes, we've had heroes, and whether they be people that have made music, or they've been people that make movies, or they play, thank you, that's a hero. Give it up for Jason for me. Hero. All right, so, but for me, growing up, the heroes that I looked up to, the people that I wanted to be like, they were people who played sports. So I used to love baseball a lot. I don't play as much anymore, but I loved watching Evan Longoria play. He used to play for the Rays, third baseman. Or I used to watch Albert Pujols. I don't know if some of you know these guys, but I would watch them, but I would get ready for school and it's only ESPN on for me. So I'm getting ready, channel 29, because I lived in Central Florida, and I would watch the top 10 plays, and I'm like, these guys are amazing, bro. I'm trying to be like him. I want to be like that. And then I'll watch other highlights from different games, and then eventually, you know how ESPN repeats? Then I keep watching, and I just watch it all over again. And so for years, I'm watching these athletes separate themselves from regular people, but also separate themselves from the other people in those leagues, and they would dominate. But there were also a few times where I'm watching ESPN, and there's times where they're reporting on some bad things that have happened. They're reporting sad news. These athletes that have become heroes to many, some of them end up making decisions that you would never expect them to make. They commit some kind of crime, or we find out, or something's exposed that they were in some kind of scandal. You know the stories. People who build these strong legacies based on how they played their sport and how they took care of their community, they end up destroying that same legacy with just one decision. We've seen this with athletes, we've seen it with actors, and we've also seen it sadly with different people who are spiritual leaders. Young me was conditioned to think, man, just because you had a good track record for a long time, then for sure you would have a good ending to your story. That it would for sure be something that no one would ever have a bad thing to say about you. But it took me witnessing the fall of a few heroes to realize I was really wrong. The Bible has several stories to teach us that very same lesson. The Bible does not flatter its heroes. Noah didn't get flattered when he messed up. Neither did David, Solomon, or Peter. And today we're going to be able to read a story that shows us that it will not flatter Moses either. These are faithful men who experienced serious failures that were written down so we can learn from them. And the story that we are going to look at today, I think, reminds me of Paul's words in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. This is what it says. So if you think you are standing firm, be careful that you do not fall. Today you may feel like you're standing firm, and I really hope that that's the case. But my hope is also that our study this morning will help us be careful of our potential to fall. Today we're going to be in Numbers chapter 20. You can join me there in your Bibles. And at this point of our study, the Israelites are still wandering through the desert. The expectation is that Moses is going to be eventually the person that leads those same people into the promised land. But within this chapter of scripture, we're going to see that plan sadly shifts. Today we explore how we can go from enjoying the glories of God's promises to losing everything. So Numbers 20, starting in verse 1. If you don't have your Bibles on you, no worries, it's going to be on the screen, but here's verse 1. In the first month, the whole Israelite community arrived at the desert of Zin, and they stayed at Kadesh. There Miriam died and was buried. So we pick back up in this narrative of Israel's wandering through the desert. They're wandering because they listened to a fearful report of the people a bit ago, instead of listening to what God said about how this land would be theirs. This generation was on the edge of the promised land back in Numbers 13. They were preparing to enter the land that God had been telling them about, that God had been preparing them for. But as a judgment for their fearful and faithless rebellion, God tells those of Israel who are 20 years old and above, he tells them that they will no longer enter the land that he swore them. God says in Numbers 14, starting in verse 32, but as for you, your bodies will fall in the wilderness. Your children will be shepherds here for 40 years. suffering for your unfaithfulness until the last of your bodies lies in the wilderness. So now where we're picking up in Numbers 20, we have this shift. We're going from this old generation to a new generation. And at this point, most of those people that were part of that old generation that ended up not being able to come into the promised land, most of them have passed away. Verse 2. Now there was no water in the community, and the people gathered in opposition to Moses and Aaron. They quarreled with Moses and said, "If only we had died when our brothers fell dead before the Lord." The complaint about not having water is something that's very familiar. We've been able to see this throughout. We've been able to see it back in Exodus 17, but I want you to imagine hearing this again and again, like what it must feel like to be Moses. We dealt with this complaint a while ago, 40 years ago, and now you're still complaining. And I know that you work with people that complain and complain and complain. And it's something that I think we can understand or be able to see, like, man, Moses, I wonder how you feel through this stuff. It must not be easy. This complaint of wanting water or complaining about their circumstance was one that they had when they were first freed from Egypt. It's also familiar because they have not stopped complaining since that point. There's this continuation, complaining that's been going on. And even for you, I mean, the last 4 weeks, the 4 Sundays, you're hearing Israel complained again, and Israel complained another time, and here they are again, one more time, complaining. Even though it's a new generation, they still have the attitude of the older generation, the rebellious generation. They're ungrateful, they're angry, and they're quarreling. In this current fight with Moses and Aaron, they have some interesting words to be able to say to them. If only we had died when our brothers fell dead before the Lord. The thirst that they're feeling is enough for them to wish they would have died with those that Tiago preached about last week, the ones that were swallowed by the earth. You might remember, but it was definitely an option for those people to die. They could have just stood back and let the earth swallow everybody. But instead of letting that happen, Moses and Aaron intercede for those complaining people. In number 16, they fall face down before God, pleading that God would not kill the whole assembly of the Israelites just because of the sin of one man. So yeah, they could have had what they're asking for. They could have died. But out of love, Moses and Aaron plead for their people on behalf. They talk to God and plead for them. This complaint here and even earlier, it's an insult to God. It's an insult to God, but it's also an insult to the loving leadership of the two men, Moses and Aaron. This is the way that the community says thank you to Moses and Aaron, and then they continue with their complaints. Why did you bring the Lord's community into the wilderness? That we and our livestock should die here? Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to this terrible place? It has no grain or figs, grapevines or pomegranates, and there's no water to drink. The community feels set up. They believe that they've been led to this place in the desert, away from water, to be killed along with their animals. The complaint a verse ago is, hey, we wish we would have died. And now the complaint is actually, hey, did you bring me here to die? And they're complaining and they're going back and forth about these things. The complaints communicate something similar to saying, God should have just let me die in my sin rather than allowing me to live and face the consequences for it. They feel the land that God has led them into is terrible. It's terrible because it doesn't have what they want. It doesn't have water, it doesn't have pomegranates, and it doesn't have grain. Their circumstance during slavery to Egypt, they believe, was more enjoyable. Here's a little graph just to compare the situations between what happened in Exodus 17 and what's happening right now. About 40 years after these first complaints for them wanting water after they were freed from Egypt, most of this generation, the old generation from Exodus 17, has passed away. But a lot is still the same. The same setting, they're in a desert. It's the same crisis, they lack water. The same reaction, complaining to Moses. It's the same heart of lacking trust. But at the end of both of these situations, we still see God supply for them. God still provides exactly what they're asking for, even though they're complaining on the way there. But as we consider these two generations, I want to make sure that you don't get caught up in the mindset of man, the Israelites are just a bunch of kind of people. Because I think you live in South Florida, and it's summertime, and you complain pretty similar. Your walk from your car to here, you probably were sweating. You're like, man, I can't stand this, bro. I walked 30 seconds and I'm sweating. You can't stand it. You hate that feeling of you walk a little bit and now you got beads of sweat rolling down your body and you're trying to figure out how to make sure they don't show. For me personally, the thing I hate the most, when the back of my knee starts to sweat, it's just, I sound like them when the back of my knee starts to sweat. I can't stand it. But I want you to consider that element. You are annoyed at different things about the heat that you're currently in, and a lot of you have the Stanley water bottles, the Owalis, you have whatever brand of water bottle filled to the brim. So you're dealing with the heat and you're sipping water. You deal with some heat and you sip water. But I want you to be able to see that you relate to them. Imagine if you were dropped in some random desert and you're just marching around until you hit your 10,000 steps for the day, and then you recognize there's no water for you. You're not gonna be like, great workout. What do we do now? Like tomorrow, the same thing, 10,000 more steps, no water? Sure, that's fine. That's scary. That's not something that you would just be comfortable with. And again, I'm not saying these things to justify their behavior, but I am saying it because you are more like them, we are more like them than we actually want to give credit, than we actually want to recognize. So it's a challenging situation for them. They've been walking a long time, and this is understandable. And then you also think about Moses being the one trying to lead this complaining group. I don't know if you've been in a situation where you're trying to like give some direction to people that are just complaining, but it's terrible. He's been dealing with these thirsty, tired, rebellious people for a long time, and he's been doing it faithfully. He's been doing it with love. He's served them even when they've decided, hey, like actually we want to kill you. We want to have you dead. Like that's what we want. You've done all this stuff for us, but we want you killed. But those wonderful memories are not at the front of the minds of these thirsty Israelites. The issue at hand is all they can think about. And after hearing these complaints, Moses and Aaron went from the assembly to the entrance of the tent of meeting and fell face down. And the glory of the Lord appeared to them. I imagine Moses and Aaron, they're looking at this group and they're hearing all these different disrespectful things, all these complaints, and they decide, instead of retaliating, hey, let's go to God. And I imagine them turning away from the people and they're still complaining. They're like, where are you going? Where's our water? We're gonna die. And they're still throwing out different complaints to him. And they walk away. They walk towards where God is, where they can ask God. But I also imagine them breathing, like those breathing techniques you do so you don't get mad and lash out at somebody, where you're like, and just walk. Like I imagine them doing that to not retaliate. And as they walk into the tent, they're overwhelmed. They're frustrated and they're unsure of what to do with these people. They still have hope, but that hope they go to God with, and they're hopeful that God would give them encouragement, that God would give them insight on how to lead these people in this current situation. And they know, they have history that God has done this before, so they have trust that it will happen again. But here's Moses, a hero, caring for the people even when they seem to care little about him. A hero even though they're treating him like he's some kind of villain. The men arrive at the entrance of the tent of meeting and they fall face down before God. And the glory of the Lord appears. And as they lay there, God provides them with instruction for how to handle Israel's issue. The Lord said to Moses, take the staff, and you and your brother Aaron gather the assembly together. Speak to that rock before their eyes, and it will pour out its water. You will bring water out of the rock for the community so they and their livestock can drink. Both Aaron and Moses are present before the Lord, but only Moses is addressed here. And a little bit later, we're going to be able to see Aaron still plays a role in the execution of this plan. But the instructions to deal with this week's episode of complaints are simple. 3 tasks are given. Take the staff, assemble the people, speak to the rock. The instructions don't include a correction of the people. It almost seems like God's okay with this new generation's complaint, or at least he's willing to listen to it and be patient with it. But what we do know is that these 3 tasks are simple. And after these are completed, the rock will pour out its water. Enough water that both of them, like Moses and Aaron, the rest of the Israelites, all of their animals, everybody will be able to drink. This is going to be enough water to quench the thirst for roughly 2 million people, maybe more, and be able to also make sure that all of their animals are taken care of as well. The miracle isn't going to just produce a few ounces of water for them to sip on, but this rock is going to become a spring which completely quenches the thirst of the people. The instructions have been communicated clearly, and now the pair of leaders needs to go and put them into action. So Moses took the staff from the Lord's presence, just as he commanded him. He and Aaron gathered the assembly together in front of the rock. Moses, up to this point in the scriptures, has been known by these words that I have highlighted on the screen, just as he commanded him. This is a long-standing theme with Moses, and here's like some examples. So when it was time for Moses to confront Pharaoh, he did that just as the Lord commanded. When it was time to oversee the construction of the tabernacle, he did that exactly as the Lord commanded. He ends up completing the tabernacle dedication just as the Lord commanded. He does the priestly rituals. He places Aaron's budding staff in front of the ark. He does all of those things just like God commanded. Throughout the story of Moses, time and time again, this phrase is used, or something like it is repeated, to be able to emphasize the fact that Moses is faithful. Since God has chosen Moses as the man to lead his people out of Egypt, Moses is portrayed over and over again as a model of exact obedience to whatever God commands. He's been faithful to God very long and through a lot. And here he is again doing things that benefit his people, doing things that are listening to what God is saying. But as he takes steps to accomplish the three tasks that God has given him, he has some words for the Israelites. And Moses said to them, "Listen, you rebels. Must we bring out water from this rock?" He launches a quick verbal jab at the complaining community, calling them rebels. Now, why would he do that? Does he have an excuse? Yes, like they've been complaining this whole time. It's been years and years of complaints. God does this amazing thing, and then the people go, "I don't like this thing." God does this another amazing thing to be nice to them and kind to them and show love to them, but then they go right back to complaining. He dealt with a whole generation of them that were complainers, and now there's a new generation, and maybe there was a chance that they wouldn't be complainers like that, but they're doing the same exact thing. The whole time he's been hearing these complaints. They've been freed from slavery, and they complain. They've been saved from death, and they complain. And all the while they're wishing, "Man, I wish I would have died. I wish we go back to that slavery. I wish this, I wish that." They've been complaining to Moses about Moses for so long, and he's sick of them. What Moses calls them is true. They are rebels. It's a very accurate statement. These people have been rebellious and constantly rebellious. And even though that was the case, God constantly provided for them. Then Moses raised his arm and struck the rock twice with his staff. Water gushed out. The community and their livestock drank. Moses' quick word to the Israelites is over, and now the answer to their complaints is available. Moses has did it. He's done it. Water came from the rock. The Israelites have their fill. The animals can drink now. And you know that feeling of when you go to like a restaurant and everybody's talking before the food gets there, and as soon as that food hits the table, everybody's silent? That's what I imagine is happening here. Moses hits the rock. Water comes out. There's no more complaining. Drink the water you were complaining about. Drink and have your fill. There's no more complaints. All of that is stopped. And now this feels like a victory to the people. But it's not a victory to God. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not trust me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I give them." Surely what was cause for celebration for the Israelites that were desperate for water was not a moment of celebration for God. The words that God says here, "Because you did not trust me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites." And the punishment is that everything that Moses was focused on doing, everything that he was doing in regards to obeying God had this goal of getting to the promised land, and now it's not happening. He'd been leading these people for 40 years with one goal in mind, to get the people to the promised land. And here, God's punishment will be that the hero, Moses, has been denied. Moses has failed. Our hero has fallen. And I want to show you how. Yes, water comes from the rock. The people are no longer having any issue with Moses, with Aaron, but the problem for Moses and Aaron has gotten worse. God has an issue with them because they did not do just as the Lord commanded. Do you remember the 3 commands? Take the staff, assemble the people, speak to the rock. Moses took the staff, check. He assembled the people, check. And then the third one, he did not do just as the Lord commanded. Instead of aiming his words towards the rock like God said, he targets the Israelites. None of the three instructions received by God said anything about speaking to them. The point of the instructions given by God were not to describe the Israelites accurately, but they were to be obeyed accurately. And after Moses went off script and didn't do what God told him to do, he went even further in the direction of disobedience. Rather than speaking to the rock, he hits the rock twice. Moses, the hero, falls. The same trap that many rebellious people had fell for earlier that he had been leading, he's now ensnared by. Moses, the prime example of human faithfulness, up to this point in the Old Testament, that man has collapsed. A critical failure. He will suffer for his actions. And again, sure, water came from the rock in abundance, but God was quick to make sure that these two men do not view this moment of disobedience as a moment of victory. But why is this a big deal? Why is this such a big problem? Like, the water is out, like people are taken care of. Why is this such a huge problem? God took issue with the fact that the people have seen these leaders trust his word over and over again. Moses and Aaron have been able to see God do amazing things. So for them to get to a point where they're like, hey, I know you said that, but I don't trust now, that's a problem. And by way of lacking trust, they did not honor God as holy in the sight of the Israelites. In addition, I want you to notice remember what Moses said about how the water will come from the rock. He doesn't say, hey, God's gonna give you water. He says, hey, do we need to bring water from this rock? He's diverting the people's attention from God and becoming the source of their miracle. They disrespected God in front of his people. And you know this feeling. You've been disrespected before, but you know it feels different when you're disrespected in a public place. You know that feeling. They no longer will be the ones to bring the Israelites into the promised land because of this very thing. The lack of trust in God comes at a horrible cost. The persistent issue that kept the older generation of Israelites from entering the promised land is now the same thing that's keeping Aaron and Moses out as well. They had failed to fully obey God's instruction, and as a result, their journey will come to a sad end on the border of the promised land. And it's here that we end our study for this week. It's a bitter end. The fall of a hero is never pleasant. There's probably people that you think of, they're like, I looked up to that person for so long, and they made this decision. And I forgave that person, I let them be a hero again, and then they fail again. You know that feeling. But this story here is a quality cautionary tale that we can learn from. And there's plenty that you can take away from it, but my hope is that you would at least consider taking this away. What you accomplish is empty if God isn't honored in the process. In this story, Moses accomplishes something. The water comes out because of what he did. Now it's ultimately God, but that feels like an accomplishment, but it's a failure because he lost sight of this. The point was never just to get the people water. It was never just to get the people to be quiet and stop their complaints. The point has always been to honor God as holy, to trust him. This story highlights that the ends do not justify the means. It also is a cautionary tale, I think, for spiritual leaders in particular. Just because an event goes well does not mean the person that put it together is faithful. Just because people are coming to Christ does not mean that the person that might have helped a little bit in leading that process is faithful. Accomplishment is not always the sign of faithfulness. And I think we all can relate with being tempted to prioritize the results and lose sight of remaining faithful on the way. It can feel like a win because we got what we really, really hoped for, but it's actually a loss because we failed to keep God holy in the process. We end up in situations where we have these godly goals, but we're willing to try to achieve them and justify ungodly methods to reach them. But again, what you accomplish is empty if God isn't honored in the process. Moses reached a point in his life where he made mental justifications for deviating from God's plan. I'm not sure how much the death of his sister played a role. I'm not sure if it was one of those circumstances where it was like the final straw on the camel's back. I don't know what it was, but either way, what we see here is God has an issue with it. And he still takes issue with this kind of behavior within us. Church, my prayer is that we would trust God enough to honor him as holy, that we don't use ungodly means to try to achieve the godly hopes that we have come to have. I hope that we can remember 1 Corinthians chapter 10 If you think you're standing firm, be careful. Be careful that you don't fall. As we conclude our time this morning, I want to leave you with a thought as you meditate and take communion. Many of us know that Moses is a type of Christ. He's an example of what Jesus would be when Jesus does walk the earth. But Moses, by way of doing that, is he intercedes for the rebellious people, the same way that Christ intercedes for us. But when Moses sinned here, who was there to intercede for him? He was left to experience God's judgment without anyone pleading to God on his behalf. He has spent his life in service to pleading and interceding for these people of Israel. But no one is there to be able to do the same for him. His punishment was so severe because he has no one to stand between him and the wrath of God. He had to deal with the complete judgment he deserved for his sins, for not trusting God as holy. And today, I believe we sit here deserving of that kind of wrath as well, for the times that we haven't trusted God and treated him as holy. The only difference is we have someone committed to interceding for us perfectly at all times, which is Jesus Christ. This is a passage that I hope would help you meditate on that idea, but Hebrews 7, it says, "But because Jesus lives forever, he has a permanent place, a permanent priesthood. Therefore, he's able to save completely those who come to God through him, because he always lives to intercede for them." Take a moment to think about what it really means to have Christ interceding for you consistently.